Hello, welcome to episode 41 of Scuttlebutt, a Marine Corps Association podcast. Today we got a special guest for you. As a capstone to PTSD Awareness Month, Vic sat down with Dr. Adam Hunzeker, who is down at Fort Bragg, and part of his work as specializing in mental health is PTSD. So it's a fantastic listen. But before we get into that, I do want to provide a update on the long road. If you'll recall, a few episodes ago, we had Sergeant Major LeHue on as he was getting ready to embark on a walk across America on Highway 20, the longest road in America. And they just passed Waterville, New York. Now, his partner, Rocky Kinzer, is kind of carrying the torch right now because as of just at this moment, on Monday, June 27th, Justin LeHue is out with some illness, but he'll be back on the road quick, and they're looking forward to hearing from everybody along the way. So if you're on the path, if you're behind Waterville, New York, you've missed them. You got to get back ahead of them, but they're coming down the road. They'd love to see you. So without any further ado, here is Vic with Dr. Adam Hunzeker. Enjoy.
Hey, welcome back to Scuttlebutt, everybody. I'm Vic, and I am here on a Memorial Day, and so I'm really privileged and honored to have Lieutenant Colonel, former Adam Hunzeker here, former U.S. Army Psychiatrist, now working private practice, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about some of his experiences, but primarily what he's dealing with PTSD, mental health issues, and treatment and symptoms, and just sort of helping us explore what trauma, combat stress, post-traumatic stress disorder is, and especially as we are now into PTSD Awareness Month. This is a really going to be just like very key. I'm looking forward to it. I know I'm going to learn a ton, and hopefully you guys listening are going to learn just as much. So Adam, man, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the offer. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and
for
just
sure.
Quick correction, Major Hunzeker.
Oh, Major. Okay, yeah, we'll definitely edit that part out.
Take the promotion.
I thought you pinned on the silver there.
Well, it was promotable. I got out before I promoted.
Yeah. So we definitely want to jump into that, because I'm sure as far as like the Army bean counters are concerned, that was probably a what the hell sort of moment. But yes, we'll get into that. But before then, just some quick context also for our listeners and those who have been listening. Yes, it's no coincidence that Adam's last name is the same as Dr. Michael Hunzeker, and that is not coincidental. They are brothers, and so I've known Adam through Mike for a long time. We've hung out, when we were both younger whippersnappers, glue sniffers, but he has been in the Army, or was in the Army, for 15 years, and Mike was nice enough to reach out and make those connections. So yeah, this is Adam Hunzeker is Dr. Michael Hunzeker's brother, and so this is another really great linkage to the show. So as we are talking, as we're entering into this conversation, if you could just give us, I don't know, as brief or as long-winded a background of how it was that you came into being in the Army, and then because you weren't at any of the academies, you weren't ROTC, right? You're just normal college student initially, correct?
Yeah, no, I was a regular college student. I went to college 2000, right? And the towers fell 2001, and so I basically always wanted to serve. You guys were in the Marine Corps. I saw you guys being in the Marine Corps and serving, especially when you guys were deploying out in 2003. It was a big motivation for me. Mike came back. I was looking to get into medical school, and I was looking at all the different options. And my brother was like, "Hey, I think you got me in touch with one of the docs for the Marine Corps, like one of the Navy guys that crosses over, takes care of the green suiters." And it was like, "Hey, check out this. It's a free medical school. You can go and do this as an opportunity." And so I signed up for it. And actually, in my So I always want to be in the military. Turns out if you're going to medical school, you shouldn't highlight that you want to be in the military because they tend to be more left-leaning organizations. And so if you're like, hey, I want to be in the military, that's what I want to do, it's not great. But it worked well for USIS. And so they were all about it. So I went into USIS, the Uniformed Services University. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. It's attached to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. And so I joined up, got the interview, told them I decided to do it. They ended up taking me. I went there 4 years of medical school. You end up rotating. Your first 2 years are like educational, and your last 2 years are rotations, clinical rotations. I think they've changed that subsequently, but then you rotate through all the major medical treatment facilities, which is kind of cool because you get to see, different forces, Air Force, Navy, and civilian. And then I did my residency for psychiatry. I did it in Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. And then I had some interesting opportunities to go to Africa while still a resident to do some experiences for PTSD there. And then we went out to, I wanted to go to Johns Hopkins to do a bunch of issues associated with neuropsychiatric sequelae associated with, traumatic brain injury. But the Army had different ideas. They sent me to the 82nd, which has tons of traumatic brain injury.
Yeah,
But
it's like
experience. Say again?
a bed, right?
Yes, the home of traumatic brain injury and airborne. And so they sent me there. I was the division psychiatrist for the 82nd for 3 years. I transitioned over to the hospital. I ran their inpatient, the medical director for their inpatient psychiatric facility. Then I ran some clinics, and then I went and deployed with the 82nd to Iraq. And then I came back, and then I did, I was part of the 44th Medical Brigade, which is like a medical sustainment brigade in the Army. And I went and deployed with them to Afghanistan. And then I came back and I finished my last 2 years with the USASOC, which is Special Operations Command, is the USASOC psychiatrist. And then I chose to get out, and I actually work now at a hospital called First Health, which is a hospital outside of Fort Bragg. So it takes care of a lot of the areas of a bit, I guess it would be west of Fort Bragg. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm running the ERs, doing some of their ER consultation and their floor consultation for psychiatric issues.
Okay. And then I think we talked a little bit on the phone before the show, but while you're there, you still have a good percentage of your patients are still in uniform. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the area, I would say the composition of the area is about 30% are like military retirees or active duty or somehow associated with the military and have benefits under it. But, a lot of the veterans didn't retire out, so they don't have TRICARE for life. They just have VA benefits, so they'll go to the VA, but we still have a good amount of retirees in our systems. And I'd say a third are just other kind of retirees because it's a big golfing community in Pinehurst. Like the Women's National Open is here now currently. So there's a lot of golfing, aficionados that come out here to live. So we've got a third that are just out here to retire, and then a third just from the local area. But it's a huge military population, just because obviously Fort Bragg is one of the biggest military installations, in the world. Right. So we got a whole lot of soldiers families, and a lot of people choose to retire out here. So I get to deal with a lot of stuff that I took care of, when I was still in uniform, now that they're retired out. And so it's been rewarding, especially to be part of it. And about, I would say, a third of the physicians that work at the hospital are retired military. So that's kind of nice too.
Okay. That's awesome. And then, so you mentioned that like you went in saying like, hey, I want to be in the military. And you said that was a little problematic. How so?
So when I went after it, it was 2005, maybe 2006, Fallujah was kicking off, and that was the military. I mean, I'm not sure if you remember that time, but there was, after we went into everybody loved us after we went into Afghanistan. And then we went to Iraq, and not everybody loved the military anymore. There's a bunch of questions. I think during that time, like even certain places in San Francisco refused to have recruiters in the colleges. So here I am applying I think at the time I was a resident of California, applying to California schools, maybe not the best idea, and sitting there saying I want to be a military physician. So it was probably lack of experience from my standpoint of like the cultural part of it. Not everybody is pro-military, as obviously my family, your family is. So right. It's just one of those things that, that we really are. And that's something that I can't hit on enough, is that we are a culture, a group of individuals that raise our own, many the vast majority of people that are in the military come from military families or have military, people that brought them in. And so, my brother obviously brought me in, and it was just one of those things. So we have cousins and aunts and uncles that are also, lifelong military people. So it's so it was a bad idea to do that. And lots of medical schools, period, just tend to be, not quite so pro-military. So it was what it was. But
interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, I mean, yeah, that's awesome though that you found sort of that meeting point where obviously the uniformed services medical schools definitely looking for people who want to be in the military. So
yes. So they were like, this is a good thing for you here. And I'm like, well, that's good.
yeah. Win-win. So then, I mean, what was it about? Obviously, Mike was ROTC at Berkeley. Did any of that sort of transcend, or was it just something that you knew you wanted to do, but just later, like, hey, let me get through sort of this, initial what kids do, go to school, get my degree, and then I'll look into it after?
Oh, Mike, the thing about Mike is, he, I love that kid, but nobody ever thought he was going to be military. Like, he was the least military kid growing up. I think he won all state for like debate, and just nobody ever thought it. And he went to Berkeley, and the last thing Berkeley's ROTC or Navy ROTC program is not, robust considering the size of the college. So nobody saw that coming out of a blue moon. So he comes back, and, my brother was probably 135 pounds soaking wet when he left, and kind of out of shape and just a different guy. And he comes back, and now here's this Marine. He's doing push-ups and running around. He's all, hoorah. And it was an impressive change for my brother. He's more feisty now, and he was just a completely different person, more self-confidence. And I was like, I want more of that. So we come from a family that believes in service. And so they were, I saw that. So I just had to figure out how it fit into my life. Because one of the things, I truly believe too, is the military takes as much as it gives. So you got to align your priorities where, you got to get something out of the military. Because if you just come in and just give sacrifice, it'll take it all and say,
Yeah.
somewhat, thank you, goodbye, here's the door. And so it's just, but it fit. I was looking to improve my life, and I think at the time I was doing lab work. I think I was earning like $28,000, and they say, hey, we're going to pay you even more, and you're going to get a medical degree out of it. And I'm like, where do I sign? You pay me more, I get free medical school, and I'm going to end up with a career on the other side. So yeah, all the stars aligned, and they said, here's your spot, and I took it. And at the time, it's 2006. I couldn't imagine that the Iraq war, Afghanistan war is going to be going on, by the time my payback is done. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a war, but it'll be over by the time we get there.
Dude, Mike and I actually said those things. Actually, probably more me than Mike. He's obviously way better at reading the tea leaves. But I was like, dude, we got our car. We're this is gonna be it. We're gonna be the big dogs on the block, man. This thing's over. We made it. We did it. And then I came back off of recruiting duty, and they were like Lance Corporals with like 3 rows high. They're on their like 3rd deployment. But at the same time, and I guess this is sort of a good lead-in, is those kids came right out of boot camp and then entry-level school, and then they didn't see CONUS for more than like 3 months at a time for almost 18 months to 2 years increments. And so I mean, we were just like you said, like 04, 05, we were just cycling them through, just chewing them up and spitting them out. And so I mean, there were just a ton of issues. And I mean, back then when you would transition out, you would sort of get a sit down, you'd get like a PowerPoint presentation from a chaplain, and then your commander would be like, hey, is everybody good? And then you'd get on a plane and go home. You get like a 96, and then you'd start right back up into workups. And I mean, we weren't mental health. I mean, Christ, I think they might have even been still calling it shell shock back then. Yeah. So anyways, so obviously it's extreme. We've come a long way, I think, but obviously a ton of ways to go. But I mean, before we even start getting into that, like, I guess let's define terms, right? Like, what is PTSD? What is combat stress? What is TBI? If you could help just sort of let's just start at the ground level and work our way up. Like, what
Sure.
are the terms and what do they mean to our body? Like,
Let's start quickly with like just a quick. How long is this total? Is it an hour long? Is that what we're going for?
dude, we'll go as long as you're willing to give us, man. So I mean,
Yeah.
even if we're gonna cut it up into a couple episodes, I mean, this is very important. So yeah, just
Let's
give
talk
it.
about precision, because a lot of people, they approach psychiatry, and psychiatry is one of those weird things where it goes from everything from your chaplain, right, to your psychiatrist, psychologists, social workers, people with the Reiki crystal. Like, there's so many people in this fray. So it's important that we talk about what it is. And there's a spectrum of science, right, where you start with like physics, and then physics builds together and gets chemistry, chemistry builds together and gets biology, and like several systems up there. We've gone past biology, past biologic systems. We straddle something between social sciences. And a lot of that is what we call empiric medicine. There are specialties, and science is always one of the such, and medicine is that we always find out new things. So what we thought yesterday is different than what we know today. So we're kind of straddling this system where we do empiric, which is trial and error. We know that there are a constellation of symptoms that travel together. We've known this for a long time. If you can think about a correlate, it's kind of like, HIV before we knew what it was. It was this constellation of symptoms that we knew, traveled together, and we knew it was something. So we call it a syndrome, right? Because we didn't know what it is. Depression is so common. We don't know what causes it. It's just we don't know. So our options are to wait and do nothing, like to let that suffering continue, or to try to, treat trial and error wise in empiric treatment until we know. Schizophrenia, we don't know what causes it. Bipolar, we don't know what causes it. We have a lot of data that says we think we know what certain things are. We have lab data and genetic data, but there's nothing that has the same vein of like cardiology, where it's pretty straightforward. We know what the pathology is or what causes it. And again, we have to create artificial systems, because if you're a cardiologist, right, let's say you have congestive heart failure, or if you're an endocrinologist taking care of diabetes, you go, oh, this is what I take care of. I take care of diabetes. You're like, okay, well, why does he have diabetes? Well, that doesn't matter. I take care of the diabetes. You know what I mean? Like, he has an eating problem. Why does he eat bad? And so all medicine specialties, medicine period, it's too complex and too many variables to take the whole person, right? We can't just say everything that he brings into the thing, his family, his bad social situation. We try to, but it's so complex that normally we cut out a system and go, this is the system we're going to do, right? And so we say comorbidity and all that. Yes, he is depressed and diabetes, but it is specialty that's more obtuse. And a lot of that is the way we were founded. We're one of the first specialties, actually, but the way we kind of grew, we grew out of neurology as well. And so, there's a lot of issues associated with ethics, associated with morality, always in the ends of medicine. When you don't know what it is, it always breaks down to what we call moral failings, right? Or bad spirits, or all those things. And so for the longest time, seizures were thought to be bad humors and, ill spirits, and we thought they were faking it. And so what we saw is like the birthplace, there's a guy named Charcot came out from neurology, and from neurology came Freud, and Freud had the right idea. All medicine breaks down to, physiology, pathophysiology. So the way your body should work, pathophysiology, the way it breaks, and then a disease state, right? And so we don't understand what our system is. I can't tell you what the emotional system is, which is psychiatry, right? Your emotional regulation system. I can tell you it's important. That emotional regulation system is what gives us motivation. It makes us work with one another, right? Because the people that want to work with one another move society forward. The ones that don't, we call antisocial or schizophrenic, right? Because they act oddly. They don't want to be around other people. How weird is that? So for humans, that's normal. But for bears, that would be absolutely normal, right? Bears don't want to hang out and build a society together, but we are more of a monkey species. We want to work together. And so that system that bonds us together, that we feel other people's pain, all of that, that's a system that can break down. And what we really get into in psychiatry is we've kind of hodgepodge this creation where we're kind of pulling it forward. We don't understand really what we're doing. There's so many of our diagnoses that are overlapping, so many systems. Like, what's the difference between sympathetic arousal, right? Anxiety and trauma. It's the same thing. It's an activation of your sympathetic arousal system. And the question is what happens over time. And so, somebody says, oh, it's an anxiety disorder. Someone says it's neurosis. Someone says it's PTSD. Veterans say it's post-traumatic stress. And it's a similar system. You have one system that's experiencing it, But the question, your chaplain may say it's a moral injury. And so it's just all these different things. And you as a soldier walk up and you're like, blam, blam, try this med, try that. And you'll get a lot of guys that try to approach situations formulaic, where they'll just try to do the one size fits all and toss a bunch of stuff at you. Like, this is what people with PTSD need. And it's just empiric treatment is trial and error by definition. And if I can say anything, it's like dialing in a rifle, right? You hit it, you see where you hit, and then you make small incremental changes until you're at target. Because if you try all one thing, then stop that, and try all other things and stop that, and whatever, you never know what you're treating. You have to do small increments and move that in, and then have, like, not to get too far ahead of it, but that ambiguity is the problem. And we're all struggling with that problem, and we're trying to help individuals without knowing the illness, exactly what it is, without perfectly understanding, like, it's what we're all going to call it. And this is not new to psychiatry. We've had all sorts of troubles. If you ever heard of the DSM, we can do a whole talk just talking about the DSM. Us agreeing on the names of diagnosis has been a huge issue, or even defining what is an illness.
Right.
The DSM-3, they still called homosexuality an illness. And is that an illness? Is a societal construct? It's that nexus between what's disease, what's behavior, and what's behavioral health, right? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Is an antisocial really a psychiatric illness? Like, what are these things? Because I tell you, schizophrenia and bipolar, they're ill, right? They have an illness. But like antisocial, frauderism, things like that, like, is that an illness? I don't know. So that's some of the struggle people, and they get caught up in it. And people will be like, see, that diagnosis changed, so it's all wrong. We've never been so popular as we are now. That's also a new thing. When I joined, like I said, hey, I'm going to do this behavioral health thing. It was still, you said behavioral health, you raise the flag, you're out. And I remember Mike telling me, with all those Marines that came back after your guys' first deployment, and they were acting out. They were good soldiers before, and they were coming back and acting out. And they called them all, they were like, these guys are dirtbags now, and we got to drum them out. And he has immense regret about that, because, we knew so little about it.
Yeah.
And it had been a good amount of years and before we had shell shock. And so we were like, how could these guys be shell shocked? They didn't get blown up. And so it's difficult. So when we talk about PTSD, so of those diagnoses, there's something with post-traumatic stress disorder is what we call it, right? It was mainly derived from a lot of one-time incidents. That's really what it looks at. Motor vehicle accidents, sexual assaults, physical assaults. And it itself has changed, where it started out being like you had to be the one who was assaulted or watch someone be assaulted. And then it became now more modern, just watching the assault, feeling someone and love that could have been, under trauma, witnessing it, or secondary trauma like us experiencing other people's. But really, it's three parts. Some sort of major trauma, right? Something where it's just bad, whatever you had to, and it's that activation of your sympathetic arousal system, right? So severe that's seared into your mind. So some part of it's not pathologic. You're supposed to remember forever if you're attacked by a tiger, right? 1.5 million years ago, we derived this system to work with each other. And some part of that's also when you're attacked by a tiger, you have to know, hey, walking through this part of the forest, this is where you get attacked to tigers. Keep your head on a swivel, right? That's a normal function of the system. If the trauma's so bad, that's where your dad got eaten by the tiger, it's going to have more gravity to it, more magnitude to it. And so that sympathetic arousal system may generalize, because that's part of how our brains work, is our brains work through associations. This is like that. You breaking my heart is like, painful. Painful was like me touching my hand on that fire, my first time I ever touched, fire, and learned that it burned. And so that's how your brains work. Like, this jungle is like that jungle. I got to watch out. I got to keep my head. But it generalizes to, outside is like a jungle. I don't even want to go outside anymore. And then it goes like, I'm not safe anywhere outside those doors. And then just extrapolates from there. But that sympathetic arousal is a key part of that post-traumatic stress. And then a second part of it is depression, because that causes energy. Like, you can't be with your head on a swivel for that long. There's an intensity to it, an irritability to it, and irritability defined as an organism's response to environmental stimuli, right? So when people are like, oh, he's all irritable, it's like, it's really just your response. The guys who are very irritable are the guys that respond quick to those kinds of things. That's how you're supposed to respond to dangerous situations, or situations where you feel, uncomfortable. You shut down or you attack. So that irritability over time takes lots of energy. I mean, because you don't sleep. Maybe you get the guys who get in that combat sleep when they come back home every 90 minutes, wake up every 90 minutes, wake up every 90 minutes, wake up. And then they don't sleep. So they're more tired. They're always on edge, and they start getting depressed because it takes energy to do that. You see that in most cycles of any kind of depression, anxiety are very intertwined. You know, you kind of just so stressed and so anxious for so long, and then you don't sleep because you have poor sleep because you're always kind of on edge, and then you're more depressed and more anxious, and it just turns into this nasty cycle of bad sleep, being always on edge, and being depressed. And then there's this overlay that I think a lot of people don't really fully comprehend of moral injury, you know, violation of that is which is right. You know what I mean? Like the tribal violation, like how could humanity do this sort of thing? I mean, you see your fair share of dead children, dead soldiers, dead women, the terrible things that happen to people in war zones. And it violates you. And this is seeing lots of post-traumatic stress, but there's a layer of to that you have to attend to, like processing that, because if you don't process it, it's just, it will hang with you. When you watch, you know, you're raised to think that things are a certain way, right? We live in the greatest country in the world. We see all those kinds of things like, hey, this is what happens. You take care of people and that stuff. And you go to a war zone where people don't take care of each other. People turn each other over to be attacked by the other enemy, right? Like, you know, different, you know, tribes turning each other over to try to get, you know, hit by missiles or attacks and stuff like that, just to turn each other over to get their land or do other terrible things to each other, or kill children or strap bombs to them and send them after people. And it's just a whole array of just violations on top of being depressed, on top of it, and on top of coming home and being completely incongruent. Right. I'm sure anybody who's been there, you know, you say, hey, look at my combat ribbon. Nobody cares about your combat ribbon outside the Marine Corps. Right. You know, they're like, what's that? You know, like they don't even recognize it. They don't see it. They don't get your dark humor. They don't understand what you've seen. I think, like, even because I work here and I have a civilian PA that works with me, and, you know, I run into these soldiers from time to time. There would be like SF guys and stuff like that. And they'll talk about running and gunning just casually, you know, because we'll break into like a veterans chat. And then, you know, she was like, wow, he was really blasé about rolling around, you know, an up armored Tata, like just, you know, hammering the the D40. And you're like, yeah, because that was his experience for 10 months or 15 months or 18 months. You know, that was what he did every day. Like that's seared into his memory. Like that's, you know, some part exciting, some part traumatic, some part everything. But when you trigger that piece, but normally he comes and tells a girl like that who sees all these veterans and stuff, but they don't really open up, and you open up to them and they're like, wow, that's dark, you know, or that's weird, or, and then they shut down because you don't want to share that stuff.
Right.
Or
So,
like, go ahead.
oh, I was just saying, so it seems like, at least from like, I guess the common understanding of things, what you're talking about is so much more nuanced than just, oh, I have flashbacks, or when I hear a loud noise, I spark and then I'm doing low crawls across my living room, or I'm waking up in the middle of the night, you know, choking whoever it is next to me. And I guess it's probably a fairly common thing within our society where we only sort of respond to the extremes, which really leaves out, like, you know, sounds like to me like 95% of the people who are suffering through this thing, whereas then they feel like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but then they feel like, well, I don't really have something that adds up to that, so I'm not even going to say anything because I'm not nearly as bad as what everybody else thinks about, you know, post-traumatic stress.
Yes. And I would say, you know, just being in this game so much, we need to stop thinking about it as being a nice, quaint disease. You know, I mean, like I have congestive heart failure, right? Okay, great. So if you have, you know, a 35, the congestive heart failure is measured by your ejection fraction, right? Like if your ejection fraction, what a normal is 37%, you're considered to be heart failure. Okay, what's 56%? It's not great, right? You're not congestive heart failure yet, but it's not great. We need to start considering these things to be more of, what's the best way to say it? Like an overuse injury. Time, distance, and intensity. The human mind and the human brain can only be exposed to so many of these things. We've seen this before we've done terrible experiments on animals, psychiatry has, and research scientists. I was also a neuroscience undergraduate in Lehigh. And so what it really shows you is that if you show animals too much exposure of this, you know, of traumatic events, or you mess with them too much, we used to do it by shocking them intermittently with no random guys. It wasn't, you know, controlled to anything. It wasn't like they did something and they were shocked. They were just randomly shocked. that they shut down. They wouldn't even protect themselves. You put them in water and they wouldn't even protect themselves. They float to the ground because they're just defeated. There's some part of the system that just finally says, you know, tap out. It's less suffering or so. I can't tell you what it is, but it's been shown over and over again. But these exposures, right, it basically leads to this overuse injury. And so just like your spine or your back, right, you can only jump out of so many planes and hit the ground so many times. There is a bell curve of people that will survive every jump. They'll be on 100, you know, and 68th, or the, you know, black or the golden dagger team that'll be jumping in the 11,000s. I met some guy who got 11,000 jumps. And they're going to be fine. And you see that anyway. You see Marines that like, they'll run and run and run and be fine. And then you got people that fall out because they have knee problems, back problems. And it's just, there's going to be people that aren't, you know, able to handle that much stress. You handle, I don't care. I've taken care of people at the pointy edge of the spear. A lot of them still have it, but they're just strong enough to have those calluses. If that makes sense. Like they deal with it in a good way or a socially acceptable way, but they're not good.
Yeah.
They're not good. They're just, they're burnt, and they know how to take it, and they know how to suck it up, and they have that composure, that constellation of, you know, humanity that allows them to deal with it, but they're not good. And so that's why we get into this thing where it's like, I have the PTSD, and you're like, okay, like I don't even bother with the diagnosis anymore. It's just kind of like do you have that sympathetic arousal piece that is just, it's uncontrollable? And do you have the more depression experience? Because everybody presents differently when they see something. Just think about, like, you're driving down the road and you see something terrible, like a terrible car accident, like just terrible, and you see bodies mangled on the ground. It sticks with you. Have you ever done it? I've had to have some first responder situations out on highways and stuff like that. It just sticks with you for a period of time. Your memory system doesn't let it go because it sears in your brain. Your brain's telling you, hold on to this. Now, if you had that all day, every day, you know, like I've worked with a lot of EMT providers, a lot of police officers who are the first responders. That's why it's not a soldier-centric issue.
Right.
There's groups of people that are just exposed to immense amount of turmoil and pain. Like, you show me physicians, I mean, I'll show you people with higher suicide rates and depression and all sorts of stuff. Veterinarians have the highest suicide rate, likely because a lot of their issues are, you know, they see suffering of animals and stuff like that, and they're not even allowed to take care of them all the time because a lot of people are like, well, that's too expensive, you know. And so seeing suffering is not a healthy thing. And so that's why, like, society, right, says, do you have the PTSD? And of course, you know, VA and all that stuff rewards you for those issues. And I think you know, I've had my fair share of, you know, of getting exposed to scary stuff, right? And I think about my own experience. I think that's made me a better provider because it helps you understand some of that sympathetic issues, you know, being in danger, of thinking you're going to die, of not knowing what the situation is going to be. And it's just, it's difficult to deal. But the last thing you can't really do, and there's constellation of comorbid symptoms with our population, like sexual assaults are different. You know, like the long-term veteran is different. The first time out soldier, you know, the 82nd guy who was rip roaring ready to get out there, went out there and failed at the mission, somebody died, something like that is different. And so it's just, you can't do a cookie cutter. You can't just go, here's some antidepressants, here's some sleeping agents, here's a little bit of therapy. Because especially like some people, they're just not ready to, there's the mainstays of therapy is prolonged exposure, where you like basically go over the trauma over and over again. You write it down so many times that you're numb to it. You know what I mean? You're just exposing yourself to it over and over again. Like an EMDR, which is basically a similar thing, but you know, you have these lights that, you know, like move your eyes. And so it's the same kind of thing. It's exposure based. And cognitive procedural therapy, which is very similar. It's just exposing yourself over and over and over again to these traumas until they don't have the same magnitude. And so it's fascinating, but it's one of those things also where, like, when you think about the brain, it's not one system. You know, it's not one system that just functions in and of itself. It's a system of systems, if that makes sense. It's the same way you can go and get ready for work with probably not thinking too much about it. But you can still walk down that hallway. You're still breathing autonomously, right? Devoid of any conscious input whatsoever. I'd say the vast majority of your day is spent on what we call, you know, like just quick thinking. Instead of like deep thought, it's quick thinking. It's just you know, do this, what happens to this stimuli, you do this, right? And you're not thinking about that. You're saying, hey, my coffee's ready. I hear that ding, I go get my coffee, right? You're not like deep thinking about what does the ding mean? You know, like you're getting your coffee, you're drinking your coffee, you're getting ready and you're going. You may not remember the majority of your mornings because it's done in that thought. But like that's also with your threat analysis system, right? Parts of your amygdala and your hippocampus are literally automatic. It's how you see a snake and you're already reacting even before you think. Because if you were a creature 1.5 million years ago who had to deep think about whether a snake was after you or a tiger was hunting you, you would be the species that did not procreate and continue on.
Right.
So you have to be that fast thinking where, you know, maybe you're like, oh, that's what happened, or that was a rope, not a snake. But if you're already pinged up and you're ready to go, that's a rough place to spend your life. In that constant, like there's a tiger around every corner. That's where we get into, and all the sequelae that comes from that. Yeah.
So I mean, it's the same reason why, like, my 5-year-old doesn't continue to grab the hot pot. He does it once, and then he just stays away from the stove now.
Yes. Except the problem is that it's generalized far past hot pots.
Right.
So now he thinks every door is hot and every, you know, everything intermittently could be hot. And so just that intermittent reward. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And then, so when we start talking, guys, about the spectrum and the system of systems and the constellation of systems, we start adding in the physiological effects of combat. So like traumatic brain injury, on top of all these other things you're already talking about. What is happening there? I mean, it seems to me like we're looking at like a system that even when it's working at a 100% efficiency is having a hard time dealing with this. Now you add in traumatic brain injury, and now you've got a reduced capacity with increased input. Am I explaining that correctly, or?
Yeah, I think so. You're talking about the comorbidity. I find that, you know, I like the way you said it, the nuanced approach to different patient populations, right? We call that cultural intelligence, cultural capacity. The United States military is one of the most unique group of individuals on the face of the planet. You know what I mean? It's just you know, you got the guys that take care of each other, right? The sustainers, or you got the Air Force, you know, the different parts of the Air Force that all are different. Like a pilot's not the same guy that, you know, is the mechanic that makes the plane move. Our Air Force mechanics aren't like our Army mechanics at all. They're completely different human beings and different like people that deal with things differently. You know, your pipe swingers, the guys that are like at the forefront doing all the nasty missions, right? They're completely different than your 11 Bravo that's just off the streets, 18-year-old just trying to get his first, you know, cuts at things. It's just all different, man. And so, yes, those different comorbidities, though, especially, I remember one of the first experiences I had was comparing, we had a combat aviation brigade, and they tend to be senior, you know, E7s, E8s, E9s, been in a long time, right? Like they were since the kickoff, they were from before the war even kicked off. And then you got a bunch of guys in the combat brigades, right, that are younger dudes. They were guys that were 18 to 24, you know, probably on their first enlistment, maybe their second, you know, like by the time they're senior, third or fourth. But, you know, it's just they hadn't had as much experience in combat, and they had very different presentations, right? Because different people break at different times. So sometimes, you know, it was just a very different presentation versus like the chronic illness, right? So you've been in a helicopter gyrating for the better part of 20 years. You're going to have comorbid issues with brain injury. You're going to have comorbid issues with musculoskeletal injuries. When you're 18, I mean, you could take all the hits that you want to, and you're still rucking along. But it's just that long, multiple issues that they're all dealing with. And so my last go around was at USASOC, and those patients were, you know, they'd been in the fight for a long time. High kinetic, high deployment rate, like you were describing, but it hadn't slowed down for them. You know, they're still on the every 6-month deployments every single year. So they're just worn out after 20 years. You know, another concept I would also include is the beginning of the war. It was exciting. So all your senior NCOs are like, it's finally, you know, this is my war. I'm ready to go. But by the time like you guys grew up, you know, I mean, like you guys were the first fray. And so some of you guys stayed, right? You were the 20 years of the war, the whole war. And so we ended up with traumatized people leading traumatized, you know, young people that were getting traumatized for the first time. And a lot of it's, you know, it's like that gallows humor. It's like, welcome to it. You know, the guys are crying and upset. They're like, this is the game, you know?
Yeah.
Suck it up, keep going. And it's just, you know, they talk about the cycle of trauma in families. It's no different. You know, this tribe that we're all part of, it's just, it's the same thing. You got your parents telling you, and they're all traumatized, you know, they're going to treat you the same way, and you're going to get traumatized too. But the big things, chronic pain, huge. It's a huge thing in the military, period. You know, we do not do super intelligent things with our bodies. It's just, they're trying to get better, I guess, but, you know, it's still the same thing. We need young people to do hard things. And we hurt bodies like it's going out of style. jumping out of airplanes, like rucking. I think our PT schedule in the 82nd was run on Mondays, ruck on Thursdays, and run on Fridays. Like that was like the and in between you did something silly, like played football to get more injuries. And so, but that's the bravado. That's where the team's at. It's just people are pushing it, and it's what's needed. But it's hard on your bodies, and you do that for 20 years, you're going to feel it, man. I have never met one senior NCO that didn't have bad knees and bad back. And so it's just the nature of it. They may smile and say that they put the pain there, but they still were hurting. So that already takes out bandwidth. We only have so much bandwidth, like mental, emotional, spiritual bandwidth. And you could probably tell me how far you can run right now, but you can't tell me how much stress you can handle. And as you get older, I remember, before I went to medical school, I was like, I could study forever. And then I realized what really studying was. And I burn out, man. I remember taking some tests just being like, I felt like someone punched me in the head. Like we'd had these 2-day long tests, and I would just be like, I felt like I was drunk by the end of the second day. I was just like, I can't think anymore. I can't do it. Right. But there's a finite bandwidth, and we give no credence to it. So we're like, hey, I can go see, 6 deployments worth of, IEDs, friends dying and dead, civilians. You can't. You just can't. And we haven't articulated that bandwidth because we don't know what it is. And so it's a problem.
So would the term, and I know this was thrown around a lot, like when I was going through, and I don't even know if it's a thing anymore, but so is combat stress then a thing, or is it just a more colloquial term for these things that you're talking about?
Sure. I think these are synonyms as we try to, you ever see there's like a joke that talks about mental health, and it's like, well, I think it just talks about complex, ambiguous situations. It's like a blind man, a deaf man, and something like that. And they're trying to feel out what they're feeling. It's an elephant, and someone's like, oh, it's wide like a tree trunk. You've heard this before,
Yeah. Oh, this is a vine.
Snake.
Yeah.
These are all the same things. We know combat sucks, right? The military sucks. It's called the suck. It's suffering, it's service, right? So it's like we put people in these tough things and bad things happen to them. Full stop. I mean, that's just like, as we try to define it further from there is where, the diagnostic misadventure goes. And so we try to get perfect where we're like, oh, well, Vic, you're just not resilient enough. And, Adam, you're resilient enough. And, like, we're trying to let's find out what makes people resilient. It's kind of test by the show. Like you get exposed to these bad exposures. Like nobody's ever going to, convince me that going to combat is a good experience. Nobody. Right. So it's like nuclear radiation. You can handle a little bit of it, right? And it's still sucks. And then you can handle a lot of it and it still sucks. And the more you handle, the more bad things happen to you. And the less you handle, the better it is for you. And our civilian compatriots who don't expose to anything other than the news, right? Or a bad Twitter, statement or something like that, are better off for it. And it's just, you're going to start the exposure. It's going to get worse. But then there's also other factors that I think are fascinating, but it's, like the culture of sacrifice. You probably heard of this before. It's like when you tell a war story and someone tells you to shut up, that's nothing. Like, oh yeah, wow, you almost got blown up, and I always joke about it when I talk to some of these guys, especially like sustainers who only got indirect fire or something like that, right? I'm like, man, could you imagine what would happen if people at Walmart suddenly took mortars, like 105s are raining down from the skies and just randomly blowing up cars and people? Like, it'd be like, they'd be pretty scared. There'd be a lot of traumatized dudes. This is not a normal experience. But you got your badass E9 walking down like he's, the stuff's coming in. He's like, if it hits me, it's my time. You're like,
yeah.
Just making you feel like a complete wuss, right? And so you're sitting there and you're like, man, like that's what we're exposed to. It's like the culture of sacrifice. We're like, oh, you deployed twice. Okay. 10-monther. Yeah. You should have seen those 15-monthers. And you're like,
yeah.
Okay.
The year got extended. How about that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, you got your combat action ribbon? Oh, okay. I got Purple Heart. You're like,
yeah. We do that one-upsmanship all the time, don't we?
Oh. Yeah. Without a doubt.
Is that sort of, is that a response to the post-traumatic stress, is to sort of validate, like, hey, like kind of like said, like, this sucks. I can then validate it by sort of being able to throw my card out on the table every time someone has a thing that they say.
Yeah, it was a unique, I think my first exposure to it, was in Iraq, and one of my E7, the platoon guy that was, leading us and keeping me, fed and, clothes and all that, was counting his stripes. And he's just like, oh man, I get one more stripe and then I'll get this. If I stay 3 more months, I'm gonna miss a birthday, but I'll get another stripe. And it's just kind of like I think we're a bunch of type A dudes, right? And females, dudes, females, a bunch of type A people who don't join the military to be passive. And everybody's just competing. And it's just, that's what it is. And especially, I truly only knew the military medical system through my training. I went to Walter Reed, and then I came and went to Fort Bragg. And Fort Bragg is an aggressive place. It's a lot of people trying to, be in charge and doing stuff. And it's just a bunch of aggressive people. And I think that mentality coupled with, the tribe values sacrifice, and it needs sacrifice, right? Like, this is not a job where you work from 9 to 5, then you phone, you're like, oh, you want me to work overtime?
Yeah, right.
That's not going to happen. And so I think it's just the culture. It's what it is. And so I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's what's needed. I was often, I think about the military, especially the Army, as this juggernaut, right? It's complete chaos, just rolling down the road. And there's these absolute heroes just giving their absolute everything to keep the tracks on as it's just rolling. And if you fall under it, it will roll right over you.
Yeah.
Hammer you over. It does not care. Yeah. And so it's just, you got guys that'll try to pull you back onto the juggernaut so you don't get crushed by it. But man, it's just moving, and it has to. I mean, early in my career, I would be frustrated because I'm like, why can't I work for Google? And I'd read all these like books like Good to Great and how Google works. And I'd be like, we could do this in the military. And then I realized, like, could you imagine first contact if the VP of Google took around and like blew up? Like, how would Google work?
Yeah.
It'd fall apart. Like I remember our airborne, we were predicting like, oh man, 35% casualties in an airborne operation. And we'd be like, okay, moving on. You're like, 35% of a 20,000 man force, like 7,000 dudes just gone. You're like, yep, that's what an airborne insertion would look like. And you're just like, it's so different. It's just, you can't even say it's similar, but yes. So living in that kind of culture, I think that's part of the military. But we have to, my belief is that we have to have more appreciation for just how emotionally toxic it is. And I don't think you can make it less toxic. I think that's what it has to be. Because I don't see us warfare getting any kinder anytime soon. And so It's just one of those things where it has to be that kind of mentality, but acknowledging, like how radiologists walk around with little badges that show how much radiation they got, or radiation technicians have that. That's how we should approach it. Or it's like, oh, you've had 2 deployments, you need to go see chaplain, somebody. Like, you can choose your menagerie of people that are going to help out, but it has to be one of these resources so we can keep tabs on you. Because if you're exposed to too much radiation, you're going to get cancer.
Yeah.
Or you'll have radiation sickness. Like, it's going to happen.
Well, let's talk about that. And I guess let's dive even deeper. We were talking on the phone. You'd mentioned some things I thought were absolutely fascinating, and the effects on the body from energy. Yeah. And something as simple as just firing a rifle, it does stuff to you. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that's probably its own show, but could you just sort of, I guess, unpack that for us a little bit, and things that we don't even consider? You mentioned like flying a helicopter. I know for fellow Amtrackers, you got the harmonics of the thing. I mean, just sitting in it, running idle, is sending energy through your body, and you can feel it. So you'd mentioned that corollary, like if you can feel it, something's happening.
Yeah, I mean, let's start here. OSHA does not cover any soldiers. I mean, it took me 15 years to find that out. Like, I was a physician in the United States military, and finally, I'm at the command level, and they're sitting there and like, there's no OSHA for soldiers. And so, like, even in garrison back home, like, we have preventative medicine guys that are out there and doing that, but that says something. So, like, if you go and work for, 3M or something like that, and you're out there on the floor around machinery, there's gonna be some guy with measuring how many, the sound that you're exposed to on both an impact level and a continuous level. And that's just some of the energies we talk about. So jumping out of airplanes, sitting there in combat, shoot houses, like breaching, you name it. Like, these people are exposed to immense amount. Think about sitting in a giant metal box with an engine. What'd you guys have, like 2 V12s or something and running those things?
Yeah, man,
it's insane.
Yeah.
And so you're basically putting your head in that, right? And so they're like, oh, we got hearing pro. I'm like, well, most of the time, does the hearing pro actually, like, has anybody ever rated your exposure to that sound before? The answer is probably no. Like, has you have a preventative medicine officer sit there, when the meter's like measuring for over a period of time, like, hey, that exceeds the level of, intensity and what? No, you're sitting inside an engine compartment as the thing is just revving continuously, or the chemicals that you're exposed to. I think one of that thing, what made me more interested is I inherited a lot of these tasks where they were looking into traumatic brain injuries or stuff they called like operator syndrome, which is fascinating. Just basically what it breaks down to is chronic exposures, chronic environmental exposures. And this is OSHA 101, right? So like if you work around chemicals, how much are you inhaling, right? You're always inhaling something. So you're sitting in the back of an Amtrak in the water, right? And how much of those fumes are going straight into your lungs, right? I know it's a lot because you're probably all feeling sick when you're in there. So that kind of thing. What is the hearing stuff that you're exposed to, right? So like we were finding that there could be most of the weapon systems that we measure today did not have anything to do with, how much can your brain be exposed to, because there's no good measurement. So they would measure hearing and like your lungs, like how many times before your lungs would start bleeding, or that your hearing would start going irreparably, damaged. And again, tonal hearing. So you're hearing like the actual bone in your ear that vibrates versus the neurons that connect that hearing, that vibrating bone to your auditory complex to your brain. Those are different things. So I'm trying to think like what a big exposure, like what a difference that'd be. That'd be like looking at, let's say I turn on a light, right? And saying this light switch is perfect. The light switch works perfectly fine. Not looking at the entire wiring that goes all the way to the light. So the light doesn't turn on, but you're like, it's fine because the light switches, it goes up and down, it works perfectly. We're like, no, but the wiring is completely gone. And that's, what your brain does. It rings, and then it goes into your brain. Your brain has to decipher what that is as it's, analyzing all these other inputs that are, coming in 11 million bits of data, every minute that's hitting your brain. And so you're sitting there and have to decipher, well, is that something I should pay attention to? Is that part of this sound? Is it a different sound?
Right.
And so it's just super complex. So some of the things we found, exposures to 50 caliber, sustained 50 caliber fire, sniper rifles. You ever shot a 223 without having hearing pro on?
Oh yeah.
That is a thing, man. And so like, yeah, there's a lot of concussive force associated with that. And I got a question. Did you feel poorly?
Yeah, I wasn't too stoked about it.
Yeah.
What? What did you say?
And the other things that we find, especially with traumatic brain injury, is what we call alterations of consciousness. It's not just loss of consciousness. In the high points of the war, maybe it was, people were digging into it more, but I had not heard about it. The signature injury was coup contra coup, which is a blatant injury, right? That's like you hit your head and then you hit it back in the thing, like if someone slams you or the truck blows up and gets thrown. And so like these sheer blast wave injuries, unless it fractured your skull, we're kind of like, suck it up, you're good. And so you even think about the war before that, we didn't even talk about traumatic brain injury unless you had serious cognitive issues or skull penetrating like injury or a skull fracture. We didn't even talk about brain injury at all. And so like, and that's a very constant war injury since World War I, since the artillery days.
The first time I had heard about a guy, so the convoy was actually coming to pick me up to take me out to Marja in 2011, got hit with an IED. And we had to actually wait around because for the first time I'd ever seen it, one of the guys in there didn't pass his mace, the Mace Test. Yeah. And so he had to stick around until he passed it. And so we were, the convoy that was coming to pick me up ended up staying at Dwyer, for like 3-4 days until this guy could pass his Mace Test. But that was like 2011. How many guys had been blown up between, essentially 2001, for a decade had been blown up, and like this is, and I'm sure they had been doing it before, but for me, this is the first time I had seen them actually give someone the Mace Test and then apply the test results to their mental health and their brain. But anyhow, that just goes to say, like, he was fine, like physiologically, his arms and legs moved the way they were, so like at 10 fingers, 10 toes, but there was just something going on with his brain. It just wasn't working because of the shock.
Let me say, not physiologically fine. I mean, that's what we gotta get our hands around.
Anatomically fine then, or
this is a big part. Like, I've devoted 15 years of my life, to the specialty of things we don't understand. Things I do understand is that your brain is made up of neurons, delicate little cells that are all interconnected in some fine little way that play out very, sensitively. And so to demonstrate, all your feelings, your emotions, your dreams, all that stuff, if I stuck a screwdriver in your head, it'd be done, gone, right? So if I hit your brain with sheer energy force, like a sound wave, right, from a concussive explosion, from a 50 cal, from you name it, like breaching anything, with that intensity, It goes through your whole body the same way, right? And so most of your cellular, I would argue, like, in your peripheral nervous system is less nuanced and delicate, right? That's why we have a skull case. It's meant to protect that super delicate thing. Otherwise, we'd have a jellyfish head, right? If it wasn't as robust, but we don't. So the nerves go out and they are more robust. They are stronger cells and less delicate and more simple, right? They axons and, neural, like you can look at more rudimentary ones like from squids and stuff like that. They're actually like pencil thickness, but like pencil lead thickness. But it's like things that, we have very delicate thing. And as the force comes through you, hollow-based and liquid-based organ systems get hit harder. And there's a differential with that. It's the same premise behind a 223 coming through with that shear force, temporary displacement, moving the cells around. You can actually have shearing forces and tearing things. Yeah. We just can't see it. That's the thing. And so again, this is under the auspices that like some exposure is okay-ish. None of it's good. You'd rather not be exposed to it at all. But over time, more and more injuries. All right, that guy got blown up once. Okay, now he's more susceptible because there could be micro little trauma that we can't see on an MRI. MRI only shows structure. That's an important thing. So we take an MRI. Let's say it doesn't. MRIs can have greater. They can look at more granular things with more coils. A lot of the ones we were looking at, especially in the earlier parts of the war, didn't have a lot of coils. So they were very, vague pictures of the brain. And it just shows structure, it doesn't show function. That's important. That's like taking a picture of your body and going, well, all your bones are intact. And then you start moving and you're like walking all hunched over and whatever. Right. Like structure was fine. Function does not look good. Like you're not moving it well. Your brain, MRI shows you a big old picture of your brain. Great. Well, how does it function? We don't have a lot of great tests for that. We have some fMRIs and stuff like that, which are like use glucose to show where brains are, but it's kind of like a Rorschach. It's like that area of your brain is glowing, right? But so these injuries can injure you on a cellular level. And so we've moved as medicine. Think about this. This has been going on for thousands of years. You ever seen those pictures of like where it shows the injured of war and stuff, and they have like an arrow through their head and like the guy's in a sling and, a stab wound and all these different things. Like traumatic brain injury or dementia pugilistica, right, has been around forever. Like it's been around as long as we've been fighting, guys getting hit in the head with hammers. And so think about how many people have been exposed to these issues. And I see traumatic brain injury all the time in civilians that have been in car accidents and stuff, that everybody's like, oh, that's just Carl. And Carl looks different than he used to. He acts a lot different. And it's just, we've known about this since Phineas Gage, the effects of like damage to the brain. But now we're to the point where we understand subtle, nuanced changes can be caused by these exposures. I would articulate this because this is a big reason people run into like, why do we need psychiatrists and all that stuff? As society evolves, right, life becomes more complex. I don't care who you are. You probably are doing whatever you're doing in life, no matter how simple you may think it is. You probably still run Excel, Microsoft, PowerPoint, and all these different things. We didn't do that 30 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. That level of complexity or the level that we had to work together, the level you have to function on a daily basis is only gotten more complex. Right. I read this article that basically talked about, how we become more technologically advanced, like your banking and all that stuff. It doesn't make life easier. It actually makes life a lot harder because now you're the banker. You know what I mean? Like you are now a banker and you are now a scheduler and you are now a typist. So all these things that make life easier actually make them more complex because now you do all those things. So if you're not emotionally well, like to the you remember Maslow's, where it's like eating and sleeping at the bottom and highest functioning at the top. If you're not functioning at that highest top, you're going to have a rough life. It's going to be difficult. So that subtle nuance damage and change, it's big. And we've been seeing more and more that these weapon systems exposure, that the weapon systems themselves cause soldiers damage and people aren't using the weapon systems correctly. There's some safety measures like blast cones and stuff like that people don't use because it turns out in combat, people aren't thinking a whole lot about, their long-term cognitive issues or thinking about surviving.
Sure. Right.
Issues.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Getting through the battle is much
turns
more.
Out
yeah. It's like, I want to have to worry about what this is going to do to me 20 years from now because I'm sure I'm going to make it through the day.
Yeah.
So then I guess we've talked about the long-term effects and the long-term exposure. So would you say that are we set up? And I guess I mean, as a society, but also, I mean, we as the DOD, are we ready for this epidemic? Like, as more and more information is coming to light and more complex and challenging it becomes because when it was just shell shock, it's just like, all right, dude, like go walk it off.
Yeah.
But now, it's like, give him a 96. He'll be fine when he comes back. Now we're realizing it's so much more than that. And it's like you said, it's at the cellular level. Are we ready to handle this?
No.
Okay.
Like, no, but I mean, that's medicine, period. Our more nuanced understanding of what life is and how we deal with it. The question is society ready to pay that bill? And that's a big question. Most people's involvement in the United States wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were via news. The vast majority of Americans didn't even know somebody in the military or at war. And so, everybody's like, take care of soldiers, take care of soldiers. And as we learn more about the cost of war and exposure-based issues with war, it's going to cost more. And the second part, I don't think the money is an issue. I think it's like the resourcing is an issue. This is one of my, issues associated with the VA is I think the mission is too wide. It's like everything to do with veterans. Like, okay, how, like troop to task. You remember that stuff? It's like everything in the military. It's like, okay, yeah, we're going to have you do this and this and this and this and this and this. And these are all priorities over here. And you're like, I got 10 dudes, I got two fire teams. What do you want me to do? Like build a school. Here's a pencil. And you're like, what? Like, how does that even happen? And so the question is, when someone comes and says, take care of veterans, you're like, what? Education, emotional well-being, domestic violence, like all these other things, like all these things. It's just like psychiatry. I get an hour and I got to go figure out, what's going on with the patient. And it is complex. And I have to figure out what I can do in that hour. And I have to do troop to task. Like I can take care of his depression, maybe his PTSD, maybe make him feel a little less severe. I can't fix his family problems. I can't fix the 6 charges against him. I can't fix his raging drug habit right now. So the question is, how do we create systems to be more intelligent on it? And in the military, the mission changes every day. Do you know what I mean? Like when I was walking out the door, we started shifting towards resiliency. Like how are we going to build resiliency? Which is, don't get me started on that. But it's like we're going to take our mental health resources to do that. And so that's a big question mark. That was my final, like, hey guys, I'm out. Thanks. Like, I view myself as someone who takes care of people. And so like trying to make ninjas out of people, that's just not in my bailiwick. And I'm like, we got a lot of guys that need to, have foundations before we put fancy roofs on them. Like we just gotta, we break dudes, we need to fix them. But that's what, like, it's constantly shifting and the mission always changes. Anybody from all the way from, not even Congress, like from the executive branch all the way down can make a change in what priorities are for the day. And that's a lot of zigzags. And so it's just hard to get, soldiers in front of dudes to take care of them. So bottom line up front, no, like we are not available. But the question is, what's going to change? We can compensate pretty easily. And I think compensation has gotten a lot better from your guys' time. Like to help people out with compensation via disability. Like there's been better understanding after 20 years of war and injuries, VA reps, and they do a great job of that. But the question is, how can you take care of people if there's no defined amount of people you have to take care of? There's only so much of you. Let's say, you're a psychiatrist. How many people can you take care of well? So the encapsulation model. Can you take care of 200? Can you take care of 500? Can you take care of 5,000? And where we get to in the VA or the military medical system is there's no limit. You will take care of whoever comes in the door. And what ends up happening is you just dilute down the person until the product isn't great. Because you got to take care of the ones on fire. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's like, well, this guy seems to be okay. I don't think he's going to kill himself. So let me just give him the general prognosis and then move on to somebody who actually I think is going to be a real threat to themselves or society, right? I mean, isn't that, it's just the sort of economy of force, right?
Let me disambue that. Somehow I could bore you with all sorts of case studies where psychiatry got involved in this. We cannot predict violence. We cannot predict behavior. Full stop.
Yeah.
That's it. No one can. I forget what it was. There's like some science article I was reading that was talking about basically, how you drop 2 balls and they hit each other in like the classic physics problem. And they said like they can basically with simple or somewhat simple thing do about 2 or 3 impacts. But after that, you have to start taking into effect like the spinning of the earth because so many complex forces are hitting it. So to try to even have the hubris that you can predict human behavior, such as suicide, it's without worth. Like if you want to have the most accuracy for that, say everybody's fine, go home, and I'll be right 99.9% of the time. And it's just, so your ability to do that it doesn't exist. And so like that's, yeah.
But then magnify that based off of what you're saying, like we'll just take everybody who comes in the door. So you're already going to have a hard enough time with one patient. Now you're just taking, it's like an Amtrak. You're just going to take one more.
And just, yeah. So with one person, you can't predict who's going to commit suicide, period. Just, you can't. So, and the one thing we don't do a great job of saying, if I do the most conservative thing is to admit everybody that looks remotely suicidal, right? 50% of people that commit suicide don't even come to behavioral health, like right off the bat, right? They don't even see anybody. But when I admit you against your will because I think you're suicidal or, you know, that you've done some behaviors, the vast majority of people will not commit suicide, right? Even if everyone's like highest of high risk, they still don't commit suicide. But now I've admitted you against your will, and you know, I mean, that's a thing that causes harm. So that's just something to think about. There is harm from being too conservative, so you have to balance that somehow. Knowing that you can't figure out who's going to do harm to others and self and all that stuff is just, it's not possible. So how do you treat people? I mean, there's more data even coming out from like Germany that says that maybe we shouldn't even be admitting people. You know what I mean? Like involuntary committing people, like if they want to and they ask to come in, that's fine. Otherwise, try to treat them at home. You know, instead of trying to predict who's going to commit suicide, if the people are asking for help, help them where they want to be helped. If they want to be helped inside a hospital, help them inside the hospital. If they want to be helped at home, help them at home. But you're right. There has to, my belief in an efficiency model, you know, this is industrial engineering 101. You've got to figure out how many people you need, how many resources you need to complete a product, whatever that product is, a treatment product. Instead of, if you just add too many people, you're just putting fires out. You're just trying to do Hail Mary catches. And you may miss the people that are subtle and coming in and literally saying, you know, like the quiet guy from Office Space, you know what I mean? Like, well, I'm going to set the whole place on fire. And you're like, you can't hear it because you're too busy taking care of the guy screaming that they're going to kill themselves. That may never kill.
I really appreciate your time here, man. I guess you're just looking at it. So then you take all of these other challenges, as we talk about, that seem, you know, they're myriad. And then you add in the command climate, and then you add in deployment cycles and this like need to be ready when the nation is least ready. You got, you know, I'm a company, I got to deploy with 180 or else I'm not a company. You know, and if I could get up to 200, the closer I get to 200, the more I can do, more stuff I can do. So, you know, I'm encouraging guys, hey, you know, could you mind foregoing your dwell? Can I get some volunteers? You know, I don't want to say it's something nefarious, but a lot of times, especially when you don't have maybe a unit Oscar or somebody at your level, or you have a chaplain who maybe isn't as engaged, he's brand new, he's new just like everybody else. And so you're, I don't know, what are some, am I inventing tensions? Are these real tensions? Like,
no, that's every bit. The juggernaut's moving, right? And everybody knows that they're moving. And there's some people that select out early. Like there's nothing you're going to bring them along. And when you choose to be done with the United States military, you're done, right? There's low utility in trying to force someone into that uniform. You know, if they're misbehaving and causing chaos, like they're just going to cause you more manpower. Like give them the time, get them out. But there's the unspoken, like, hey, how about, you know, accessioning standards? Suddenly accessioning standards go lower when you need more soldiers. And it's just the name of the game. You got to meet mission, man. The mission has to be, mission's primary and it has to go. And a lot of soldiers are sucking wind and are trying. And so you don't want to take them out of the fight, right? You're like, I don't know if this guy should go on the deployment, or I don't know if this guy should go on the training cycle. And sometimes people are like, hey, la-di-da-di, everybody. Like, I get it. Okay, you're a little suicidal. We'll put you in, you know, the white cell for the training op. Like,
yeah.
You'll be eyes on 24/7. So it's like, it's tough, man. But that is the duality of behavioral health in the military, which is you have a mission. So you have a responsibility to command and responsibility to soldier. And that's something a lot of civilians don't understand, but the juggernaut has to continue. It's just the name of the game, man. So forcing someone who's suicidal, and that's, I guess, the difference is because everybody approaches differently. You got commanders like, everybody, and you're like, please don't take the schizophrenic patient. Like, it's gonna cause a lot of problems. He's not, you know, he's whatever. And trying to find the guy who's like, yeah, he's not doing well, but he wants to promote, he wants to keep going, he knows he has to go and do this mission because otherwise he won't promote. And so how do we support that guy in there without causing mission failure, you know, man, or causing, you know, because it's, you know, right, it's 2 casualties or more the second someone has a problem. they got to be evacuated. I did a lot of evacuations. I was at Cray Joint Theater Hospital evacuating people out of Afghanistan, and it is like resource intensive getting those guys out of there. And that's what prompted, it cost so much resources that's what prompted a lot of CENTCOM commanders to say, no more. You have any behavioral health issues, you need to be, certain magnitude of behavioral health issues, you need to get cleared. And they put those out. That was like mod 15 and all that stuff, which basically said, hey, we're evacuating too many people. The vast majority of evacuations for medical reasons were behavioral health. And so they're like, because the intensity of the fighting had gone down. And so it was just, they're like, hey, slow down. Let's evaluate who we're putting in the fight. Because it's so mission and it costs a lot of resources to get them out there. Not saying it's not worth it. I'm just saying it's a lot of resources to get them out of it. But you're right. There's a balance, and that's where the nuanced, that's where the time takes, where you're like, hey, this is why we need behavioral health assets forward, is to delineate between who can we treat in place, who do we send home, because getting sent home is devastating. I mean, it's one thing if you just want to be done, but man, it is devastating if it's not. But if you have a suicide in theater, it is brutal. I've had my fair share of, patient suicide, both home side and otherwise. When their units get exposed to it, it's devastating.
Because you get it from even guys who are like physically wounded. They don't want to go and, because they don't want to leave their, their comrades. They don't want to leave their unit while their unit is still on the fight. And so to be told, like, kind of like you're saying, like, hey, dude, your capacity to handle stress, you're maxed out, dude. You got to go. Getting sent home as a casualty in that way has got to be detrimental in its own right. Oh, yeah. Because now all that regret and I don't know, like feelings of inadequacy or whatever that would be, however it manifests itself, that can't be an easy transition on their end. It's not like they're going, whoo, thank God. Like, you're right. My cup was full. You got me out right when I needed to, right? Like no one says that, right?
I mean, I've had the whole gambit, man. I've had guys who's, please send me home. I don't want to be here anymore. And there's been, different parts of the war where it's like, sorry, bro, get back in the fight. Like, this is where it's at. And I've had times where it's, hey, just get the guy out. It's not worth it. I've had guys begging not to go home that had to go home. They were suicidal. They weren't saying they were suicidal then, but they've been doing every single piece that was like not healthy. And they just did not belong with a rifle in a war zone. And I've had guys, because I've been on the receiving end too, right? Fort Bragg, you're sitting in the ER, you get all kinds of guys coming back that are just like, oh, I just wanted to go home and see my, wife, and then ended up shooting himself, like in front of his wife. It's just the whole gambit. I can't say that is a unique thing that you try to approach and do the best you can, knowing that you're not a wizard and you don't have a crystal ball, and you try to maximize. My belief is you try to maximize the organizational interest and the person's interest. Because if you maximize the person's interest, you say whatever you need to do, we'll do. Right? You want to stay. You want to go. But if you're in a war zone, you need a mission. You need to complete that mission. You need to complete the mission. It's just the name of the game, because other people could die if that mission doesn't, it doesn't happen. So it's tough, man. It's very tough. So that's another aspect that's difficult with it, right? So you're trying to treat people while treating the organization too, because you got two patients. I remember I did some presentations at the APA talking about that, that duality of dual agency, where you have an agency's interest. It's kind of like the FAA has some issues, when you're trying to clear people for flying. I'm a flight surgeon as well, and part of that was, can this person fly? And it's difficult. Can you really say, hey, the guy with depression can't fly? It is tough. That is something I do not miss from active duty anymore, trying to figure out people's jobs anymore. I'm glad to not have to do that, because that is a difficult thing for a physician to do. Wants to help the patient in front of them. And sometimes you're like, yeah, you can't fly anymore, because regulations say you're on antidepressant, you can't fly. You're on antidepressant, you can't fly.
Yeah.
Which they're changing right now, or they've changed. But, still, that's a difficult process. Glad I don't have to do that anymore.
Well, so, I mean, you said that, you've got basically two patients. Does that mean that, for providers such as yourself and guys who are on the front line of this fight, are you a patient of someone? Or, because obviously the buck doesn't stop with you guys. And as far as like exposure or stress, it's got to be, this has to be a hard job for you to be in the trenches as long as you have been, right? What is it? What is your guys' thing? Do you just see other psychiatrists, or like?
It's yeah. colleagues, friends. I mean, that's the part the recruiter didn't tell you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I mean, you do what you can. A lot of the system, though, the issue is you can't really get seen a whole lot for behavioral health outside the system. So you have to be seen inside the system. And I had my own issues, and I ended up just seeing internal medicine doc friends, to see it because I didn't want to go see my colleagues to talk about behavioral health issues. And so it's tough, man. But that's part of the system, and the system needs to know you're good to go. So you can't just escape the system. I mean, lots of people do. The system has tried to open up better things for you, like with called Inflex, which are like marriage, family, life counselors that are basically off chart. But a lot of the issues are that, when people become on chart, they have to go to the chart. Like, they have to put stuff on it. But I can't say it enough. The Army has become, especially compared to some of its compatriots like the Air Force and stuff, much more liberal with mental health issues. It's, just much more liberal. Even on your SF-86, anything related to a deployment, you don't even have to list on it. SF-86 for us, I assume it's the same for everybody's, your background check stuff.
Yeah.
And so you like schools, like you're probably not going to go straight into SF if you have issues anytime in the recent past, but like anything you can get into, you can do it with any kind of behavioral health history in the past, especially showing that you overcame it, got the care, and then moved on. Army's been very good about adapting to that, just especially because, man, 1 out of 10 people in the unit, like the military forces, are on antidepressants. That's insane. It's just is what it is. It actually replicates much to society, but these are younger, healthier people theoretically. I mean, 1 out of 10 kids in school right now have a diagnosis of ADHD. You know what I mean? So like if you're trying to say no more behavioral health, you're going to have a tough time recruiting. And 90% of those are treated with stimulants. That's a lot of people. And I don't know, I don't want to get into the whole whether or not ADHD exists or anything, but that's a huge thing that the military has to adjust to. They already talk about 75% of people aren't eligible for military service due to medical issues or obesity or, educational problems. And so, we have to accommodate. And so we exploded I can't remember which year it was, maybe 2013, we exploded 300% for our manning. Well, the slots exploded 300%. The billets didn't. So the billets exploded, but the people didn't. We didn't create more psychiatrists. We only have so many coming in. And so, suddenly there were all these gaps in the mental health arena because we didn't have any of the people. It takes so long to make a psychologist, so long to make a social worker, so long to make a psychiatrist. So they just didn't have those spots, which put more strain on the force.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked on the phone about the Oscar situation that we had. Our Oscar was basically the division Oscar. And so the only time we'd see him was really like maybe a staff meeting here and there. And then if we had an incident, then we had to, call in the strike force. But yeah. Anyways, dude, I really, really appreciate your time. I guess the one question I have for you as we're closing out then is, what advice or what sort of nuggets out of all of this for our listeners who are either experiencing mental health issues on their end, or a commander who is also experiencing, but then is also in command of people who are experiencing, like, what would your advice be for our listeners as we try to be good stewards of the people we're in charge of, and really, like, in good faith, try to take care of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines?
I can't speak for the Air Force. Last time I dealt with the Air Force, they're very prickly about mental health. I was deployed with an Air Force facility, so they're very different when it comes to like the mental health issue. I think a lot of people are coming online with like the embedded behavior, what you call them the Oscars in the Marine Corps, but everybody's starting to have them. And it's funny me talking to some of these guys that are now having issues related to that embeddedness, right? Because you're closer to command, which is good because you're more integrated. So when you wear the same patch, it makes life easier. You know what I mean? Like to get in and get belief, because it's all about trust. It's all being part of the tribe. The biggest thing I could say is just, if you're a mental health provider, get in the unit. Like, I always had providers, especially that would like hide in the clinics and stuff like that. You can't win the game in the military being like that because you're them then, and you want to be us, not them. And so you got to get in the unit. You got to get into it. But you're gonna open up just a Pandora's box of, I can remember sitting there with one of my sergeant majors, treating him, getting him through withdrawal. You know what I mean? Like, he's withdrawing from alcohol and treating him in place because you're just like, you're given these situations and you can either shun them and be like, go to the hospital. You treat them in place and take care of them where they're at. And it's just, it's a thing. Get the help. That's all I can say. The problems only get worse. And then we end up getting just nut rolled into the domestic violence, alcohol, substance use, conduct unbecoming, affairs, you name it. Just all these things, they nut roll, man. And when you're sucking wind, you're probably the last one to know it. Everybody around you that loves you is the one that tell you, like, you got a problem, you're too irritable, you're too on edge. And that's usually just because you're burning too hot. Because that intensity is rewarded in the military, right? You like the guy that's a hammer. He's the guy who's there, but that is double edged. You can't run that hot for that long. When you talk to anybody, like, you got to take your knees. And so leaders get the help. I think leaders have become much more awesome. Rarely, by the beginning of my career to the end of my career, man, their commanders were all over support. Like, give me the support. They wanted it. They're like, take care of my soldiers. Do this. Get in here. Go talk to my soldiers. Where in the beginning it was like, my guys don't have a problem. Get out of here. You know what I mean? So it's just night and day when it comes to that. But the problem is that demand signal went up and the manning didn't go up. So it wasn't commensurate. But get the care. Reach out. Find it. It's there. It may not be easy. It may not be clear. But you just got to get the care. And if you're in the veterans, man, that's my big thing right now is I'm trying to find, an efficient model to take care of veterans. But it's hard. It's very hard. But get the care. It's there. And a lot of things are, this thing's like an incredibly complex Monopoly game, if you know what I mean. And you don't know. So the first thing you do, if you have any reservations, is reach out and talk to somebody that that knows something about it. The unit social worker or anybody, and say, I want to get behavioral health. I'm worried about fill in the blank, and then talk to them. Because we know it, we've been doing it. We can quote retention standards, accession standards. I can quote UCMJ associated with whatever issues. We can help you guide through that thing. But the end state is just get help, because the problem only grows. And so you can white knuckle it for so long. You can drink, do drugs, do something like that. But sooner or later it pops and there's an issue. So just get the care you need. And the other part is, if you think there's a problem and everybody telling you there's not a problem, just keep pushing until you find the right resource. And so for the DOD, at least the Army, like these Intrepid Spirit facilities are pretty good. They're coming online. Well, they've been online. They're getting more robust, especially for traumatic brain injury. Those are the best things. Chronic pain, if you got the chronic pain, get the care. Because a lot of guys only wait until the very end to get the chronic pain taken care of, because they just, ruck through it, get it taken earlier, because it just exacerbates and it'll just cause more trauma down the edge. If you need to take some knees in the, when are you going to take a knee? When you're going to, your NCO professional course? No, you can't take a knee then, right? And so there's no breathing space. You're going to take it before deployment, but you gotta take the time for it. And the mental health, whether it's medications or therapy, you just got to find the right balance, because it has to be one or the other. Like, a lot of people, you don't need both. And the military medical system too, though. So it's like, you go there and they're like, well, we won't do x-rays until after you've done physical therapy. You're like, but I think it's damaged. Like,
right.
X-rays. And so they're like, okay, well, now we can do x-rays. And you're like, it's been like 6 weeks through this thing. Like, why didn't we just do that? And like, civilian would not be like that. If they're like, hey, I can't do the x-rays right away. So in the military, they're like, oh, do therapy first, and then we'll start meds, and we'll do therapy plus your PCM, and then we'll do therapy plus your psychiatrist. And that's not how the civilian system is. And it's hard to get through. And sometimes you just get fed up already. It's hard. Antidepressants take time. But it's the same thing. You got to try them on. There's no antidepressant singly that works. So it's just, you got to have patience. But yeah,
patience, man. Patience is a virtue, which is hard to do, man. Luckily now it seems like, we got a little bit of time to be overly colloquial, to sort of lick our wounds. We got some separation from at least the really bad stuff. But, one thing that you can predict is the military will be called to go do this stuff again. And there's no indication that it's going to be a flash fire, man. It's like the way the world, and sort of like you're talking about the interconnectedness, anything that is going to explode, and it's going to take some time. And we're going to have a lot of people bringing a lot of baggage to the fight. And so, well, dude, I really appreciate you taking this much time, especially on a Memorial Day, but I can't imagine a topic more important to talk about as we are in Memorial Day. And so, dude, I thank you for sharing your expertise, and hopefully get a lot of feedback on this, and maybe we'll get you back on and start talking about some of, we could drill down a little bit on some more of these nuances, man, because they're very important, especially for those who are experiencing, and then those who are leading those who are experiencing mental health issues, dude. So
Hey, can I
thank
put
you
out
so
a
much.
plea before we go?
Dude. What's that?
Can I put out a plea or request real quick?
Please. Yeah, absolutely.
If you guys, if anybody's out there that is in mental health or physical medicine or anything that feels like they've cracked the code or know an efficient model or feel like they're doing best practices, please reach out to me. I would love to know more about what you're doing, because that's what we're trying to do. And I know there's best practices hiding out there, and I'm a student, a forever student, and I want to learn. So if you know something that works, reach out to me and let me know, because I would love to know. So.
And what's the best way to get in touch with you?
It's adamhunzeker at yahoo.com, ADAMHUNZEKER at yahoo.com. And if you know something that's going on, man, shoot it out to me. Send me an email, make connections, because I am a firm believer that the solution is not going to be found for us. We're a bunch of, we are people, we are a tribe of people that come up with our own solutions, and we fix things, we get stuff done. And, I think that's where we're at, is we realize we are finally coming to grips with the emotional and psychological issues associated with these services. And we're finally coming to grips with, we're not just drinking it and not talking about it. And so it's just one of those things where, there's a best practice out there somewhere. There's some kind of group that's doing great treatment that I just don't know how to do. There's some hack to this system. And, I believe in crowdsourcing issues. So if somebody knows something, somebody knows a best practice, if some VA's humming that you just think that, hey, you cracked the code, send me an email so I can do the same thing here at Fort Bragg, because, I want to know the answer.
Awesome, dude. Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes too, and encourage everybody to reach out to us and to reach out to you, because this is an extremely important issue, obviously. And kind of like you said, about the time that you realize you have a problem, you've probably already done a bunch of stuff. And there's a ton of flags and indicators prior to it. And you don't want to be that person looking in the review going, man, I could have got in front of this thing. And I was just too proud, or I was just too busy, or, fill in the blank on the two part. But we can't continue to kick this can down the road any further.
I agree.
So as you know, man, 15 years and you had to step away. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but anyways, dude, so great to see you again.
Yeah.
Congratulations on all your successes, dude. I'm so proud of you. It's weird to say, cause you're not my brother, but I feel in some way you are family, dude. So I'm super stoked for everything you got going on. And yeah, thanks again for taking the time to be on the show, man.
Thanks for the opportunity. I love it. Thanks.
All right, dude, take it easy.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am Nick Wilson. That is Major Vic Ruble, U.S. Marine Corps retired. We have also heard the voices of or contributions from William Treuting or Nancy Lichtman, editors of Gazette and Leatherneck magazines, respectively. Opinions expressed in Scuttlebutt are just that, opinions, and do not represent any official stance of the MCA.